So, good afternoon, everybody. I welcome you to a lecture that is going to be given by a person who has just recently been awarded with honorary degree from Masarykova University. Such a coincidence. Frank Mittelbach is a person that stands behind LaTeX, which is a tool for producing documents, and I believe he will introduce much more in details of what this work is all about. Please, Frank, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I have a very long title here. This title you can ignore. Basically, what I'm going to try to telling you in the next hour or so is about the evolution of document production through 555 years of history. And this comes into, let me see if I get this on, and it actually works. This is precisely what I hoped for. It is not. Aha. Yes, okay. It is 3 parts. The first part is 500 years of history, starting around Gutenberg and seeing what his invention and later inventions did to document production. And then a second part, which is covering about 50 years, is a new approach that came into being at that time, with the 2 people there in the second picture in the middle. I'm going to introduce them later. And then the final part is about the last 5 years of history, which is where we are talking a little bit about yet another shift in document production and what that means now. Okay, let me introduce you first to the main players in my lecture. First of all, this Greek word techne, which means creative art. It means craftsmanship. It means things you do very well. And this is not by coincidence also the name of the program which we know as tech, which is the second part of my story. And it also belongs to all the people that I'm going to talk about in my lecture over the years, starting with a person called Johannes Gänzfleisch zu Gutenberg. This is the person labeled Man of the Millennium by several people. Nobody knows how he looks like, but in my home city, in Mainz, this is the way we depict him, with a long beard. But the first picture of him was 150 years after his death, so it's really unclear what he's looking like. The second important person in my talk is Professor Hermann Zapf, who is, in my opinion, one of the greatest typographers of the last century, a very lovable person, and he is also a visionary in digital typography. He was thinking about this way before Steve Jobs even started thinking about doing something with the Apple Mac at the time. Then somebody, I think everybody in this university, at least from the computer science department, should know very well, Professor Donald Knuth. This is a picture from 81, taken by me in Stockholm, where he got his honorary doctorate there, a little bit later. No, earlier than here. But he's also an honorary doctor at this university. He got a Turing Award already in '74, which is the kind of Nobel Prize in informatics, computer science. And finally, Dr. Leslie Lamport, also a Turing Award winner in 2013. He is responsible for the first version of LaTeX. So, let us go and have a look at document production over the centuries. And we start before Gutenberg. So what happened then? Can you read this, by the way? If not, come closer, because the pictures go, I think I can make it a little bit bigger, but then we have something to work through later. We will see. I hope it's okay. Yeah, before Gutenberg, we have an author. The author was writing a manuscript by hand, and then this was a single object. And the only way to get the information to somebody else was through this object, so people could read this particular book. And you could make copies of it by a scribe. This was the way to multiply information this way, hand-to-hand copy, one at a time. And of course, during this kind of reproduction, we had errors, because the scribes were not necessarily understanding fully what they were copying. It was handwritten before, it was handwritten after. People make abbreviations. The next copy had different abbreviations, so things got worse from copy to copy, basically. Every manuscript was unique afterwards, and there were a few only. So what does this mean for access to information? Basically, very, very limited. Very few books. The books were not distributed very widely between monarchies by copying, but that's it. Most of the information throughout countries and so was by oral communication. People were telling other people's stories, basically. Then with Gutenberg, what changed? We have new players. In the middle, there's no longer a scribe. We still have an author who writes his book by hand or his manuscript. And then we have a typesetter. And the typesetter produces a printable form of the book. And the important point is that is reproducible. But at this stage, we have again the problems that errors were being made from the handwritten copy to the manuscript, which is then in printable form. And we have a second player in that space. Initially, typesetter and printer were usually the same people, but later on that sort of divided. And this printer row was then producing copies of the same document. So for the first time, we get a reproduction process going. The author itself, himself or herself, usually him at that time, I guess, no, not always, had little influence in the final product. Normally, it happened after he had delivered the manuscript, and everything else was later on. So it depended a little bit, but most of the time, these errors were not being corrected if they were introduced. What do we have with access to information then? Well, first of all, we have for the first time relatively fast means of production for short documents. For longer documents, that's not quite true, but still much faster than before. The Gutenberg Bible took about 2 years to produce. And then you had, not sure, nearly 2,000 copies, so quite a large number afterwards of identical books. We have a wider distribution this way, especially for short documents. The moment the invention took speed and more typesetters and printers appeared, we had a lot of document production going on fairly fast. And as a result of this, we started to see people learning to read more and also to write. It came together. But the point was that throughout we have, for the first time, reproducible information in identical form. including the errors that were introduced, but not changing from one copy to the next, basically. Okay, so that was the first sort of big step, and it enabled things like, well, the Reformation, because you could sort of distribute information pretty fast on small scale. If you go a little bit further in history, we get another player in this mix, which is the publisher. Publishing houses, publishers appeared around between 1700 and 1800, roughly, depending on what you call this role. What happens there? We still have an author who's producing the manuscript. So for the author, nothing really changes much. But now, instead of having to communicate with the typesetter, we have this role of publisher in the middle. The publisher is going to edit and correct the manuscript. The publisher also is responsible for the overall distribution side of the thing. And he is the one who is interfacing between author and typesetting. So it's no longer the author who gives something to the typesetter, it's the publisher who gives something to the typesetter. So the big question is, first of all, is the author involved in what the publisher is editing? Or is this a one-directional step? Depending on that, it depends how much sort of misinformation ends up in your book. And that's quite different from situation to situation. The second is we now get a new type of error. It's the publisher who decides what the typesetter is supposed to produce. So it becomes more like a signature thing for publishing houses. And that then depends, can the typesetter actually do it in the proper way? Or do they have to have shortcuts because not the right fonts are there, they have to use something else and stuff like this. So again, you have a point where there could be errors. So unexpected restrictions can be a problem here. And again, the author has normally no influence to the whole process of the later part. Because of these additional errors, we have, or had, in some cases, another step in the process, which is after the typesetter has done the typesetting and the printer has produced the first pages, there was a step to check the proofs and potentially correct one or the other thing that was typeset. These days, it's going less and less often the case that there is this proofing step happening, which is a clear downside in the publishing world, if you look at it. When I did my first books, it was really a big part of the story. My last book, I had to fight for it. So things change here again, not necessarily for the better. Then, around the 1900s, end of 19th century, we had, for the first time, hand typesetting being partly replaced by machines. And in this way, there were some new techniques, but conceptually, they were mimicking the way the typesetter in Gutenberg's time was doing it. It was just done by machine in some sense. And so as a result, we had more or less the same kind of restrictions. Some were replaced by new ones. The complexity of the whole process was not made simpler, changed in any way. It was more or less the same kind of situation. And what I didn't say before, but you can imagine that it is throughout the whole history, if you find problems in the later part of the process, like when a whole page has been paginated and you find a typographical error, it's pretty hard to fix it, depending on what kind of error it was, like a missed word. There's no space to do it. And so it is very costly to do these kind of corrections very late in the game, and that didn't change either. And we have the situation with machines, we can be faster, which is one of the sort of good things of the machine age there. But at the same time, it typically reduced the quality. So there is an up and downside, you could say. So what do we have in terms of access to information? Well, first of all, because of the automation and the machine part of the typesetting, we really enabled mass production for the first time. I mean, things got faster after Gutenberg because people learned to operate the process a little bit better, but it didn't change much. It took time to paginate a page using hot metal. It just takes time. If anybody ever tried that, it's fun, but it takes time. With machinery, that really changed, and so you had for the first time mass production. You had for the first time newspapers appearing because they wanted to print the news from today or at least from this week. So they had to be fast in getting the information into printable results. So that's really new. What didn't work at that time was to automate anything with more complex data than ordinary text. So mathematical typesetting was not automated at all or possible. So anything in the STEM world was basically out of the game at this time when it came to automation. So why was mathematics then complex or difficult? Well, first of all, mathematical formulas are typically two-dimensional. You don't have a linear text, you have things on top of each other, fractions, integrals, whatever, complex equations that are vertically aligned, things like that. And that's very difficult to produce with the traditional methods, and therefore it's both expensive and it's also likely to produce mistakes or results in mistakes in the output. The second thing about mathematics, we mathematicians, and I still call myself one, even though it's no longer really correct, I guess. We love to use any symbol that is out there. And even if it's not out there, we might even make one up. So in my diploma thesis, I used one of the card game symbols. The German word is peak, whatever the English word is. Never mind. Some of those symbols, introducing one thing that I needed and which wasn't used in literature before, and so so I ended up with a new symbol, and in other words, we have throughout history any alphabet, whether it's Greek or Cyrillic or whatever, came into the hand of mathematicians. My former algebra professor loved to have the old German Süderlin, and we poor students had to learn those to distinguish those letters on his whiteboard or blackboard at the time. So yeah, we have a lot of them, and they all have very precise meanings. So often the typesetter had not all of those symbols available in his stock if you are a hot metal typesetter. So there's a tendency to replace stuff. And that's kind of dangerous, right? Because that changes meaning. And so you end up with incorrect representations, distorted meanings, and in some sense, to be doing proper mass typesetting, you have to have a typesetter who understands what the mathematics means, at least on a more or less high level, if you like, but certainly more than just thinking that the German sharp S could be replaced by a beta or vice versa in Greek letters, because that just happened to be there. Few examples just to show for all these different arrows. Are they the same? Can they be replaced? Those things certainly have meanings. Complicated question. You can imagine in hot metal type, that's not easy to produce. Yeah, another example was many sort of variant forms of symbols that look similar but are not identical. Okay. So, what kind of summary can we take from those 500 years? To some extent, the typesetting as such, hot metal typesetting, didn't change conceptually very much. I mean, there was machine introduction, but that's about it. Once Gutenberg invention became the norm, things went on with just sort of procedural changes. The issues since the 1500 haven't changed either very much. The author has little control about the finished product. We have the lost in translation problem, which means there are various steps in the process where information can be distorted. And the more this happens, the less likely the output is still understandable or correct. We have a problem with complex content, especially with mathematical formulas. Whenever you have to fix something later in the process, it's very difficult and very expensive. And we have the situation that the automation that was introduced in the 19th century actually get the quality down, so things were not so good. So, question, can we do better? That was, in some sense, what Professor Donald Knuth and Professor Hermann Zapf were asking. And I'm coming to that in a second. Before, I would like to have a small set of intermezzi. First, I'm talking briefly about Gutenberg's Bible. That's a picture from a Bible page from the Genesis and the Gutenberg Bible in Mainz, one of the Gutenberg Bibles in Mainz. What you can see, at least from far away, is we have very even typesetting. These are narrow columns. If you think about narrow columns in journals these days, you find very wide spaces, things like that. This is not the case here. It's very, very conforming from one line to the next. The second thing, which is nice, and maybe I can try to show that here, is you see something like optical alignment. In other words, some characters stick out a little bit in the margin. If there's just a hyphenation, these double lines, they stick out compared to the lines before. They don't take much blackness. Therefore, by sticking them out in the margin, the overall margin, if you zoom out, looks straight. Yeah. So this is something that Gutenberg already did. The question is, how did he manage to get this even spacing? That's, in some sense, a very, very interesting historical question. We come to the answer a little bit later. Okay, and here's mass typesetting. Isn't that beautiful? This is how they did it in metal typesetting. All these little blocks were sort of piece by piece put together to align the stuff. And you can imagine that's expensive to do. That costs you. You have to be an expert to manage it, but even if you can manage it, it takes a lot of time. Okay, so before the end of the 19th century, that was only manual typesetting. So there were experts who could do this kind of thing. So there were books doing mathematics in hot metal, but very few. Then, little later, we had monotype coming up with a machinery that then, for example, in 1952, actually could produce type, mathematical type by machine. And this was part of the reason why Donald Knuth started to think about doing it himself, because the quality was really less than the hot metal version that was done before. Okay, examples with low budget and with high budget. This is from my shelf, and I'm sorry for the bad pictures, but I hope it is still visible what I'm trying to say here. This is a manuscript from my university, which was sold to students, so it's not a high costly thing. What did they do? They used typewriter, and they used a lot of manual drawings to get things done. It's understandable, but it's not easy to produce, and it's not very nice looking either, okay? This is a very expensive Springer publication. You can still buy it in exactly this quality. It costs you something like 60 euros, I think. Oh. And this is done with, I think, with an IBM typewriter golf ball typewriter, which is where you can change the ball to have different letters used. So some of the symbols were actually on balls, so you had to change balls back and forth, but not all of them were actually used. So for example, if you look closely in this line with the, oops, sorry, this one, no, that was not planned. Where are we? You shouldn't, this is the one, yes, that's the one. Okay. If you look at the line with für 1 less or equal k and so, you can see the less or equal, they are not equal. They are not equal. The less sign, I think, was done with the typewriter, and the equal, the second line was drawn by hand. So you can see it's differently shaped, and it's sometimes further away from the other. So it was a mixture of all three ways of doing things. Okay, so let's go. Let's look at the high quality. That's actually a year earlier, and beside the fact that I had some wrong light when I took the photo, that's pretty neat. It's a really cheap book on number theory, but it's pretty nicely done for a book that only costs 15 euros at the time. 15, yes. So it must have been a famous book in the sense that a lot of people were buying it, otherwise I don't know how they managed. And here's another one. Springer can do proper typesetting as well. Both there on the right. So that was done in much better quality than the one we have seen before. Okay, so anyway, this was the situation around 77, and Donald Knuth was really disappointed with his publisher producing a new edition of his book, so he thought this must be possible to do better. And so he started a sabbatical project to make it work. It took him 10 years, but that's what's coming out of it. So what was the new approach? We still have an author. This time the author is actually not writing something by hand. He's writing into the computer. And he is using the language that Don invented, tech, as an input language. Then, instead of a typesetter and a printer, we suddenly have a computer. So this is a big change. And this computer is then typesetting the book based out of the input that the author produced. And it is using digital fonts, and the computer is controlling the printing process. So the computer is doing what the typesetter and the printer was doing in the past. Now, to be able to do this, you need to have a number of prerequisites. And the first one is you have to have printers who can actually process digital data. That was not always the case. But it was the case at this time when Don started this process. The second thing is, and this was why Don was doing it, the computer program can actually match or exceed the quality that hand printing was able to do in the past. Because otherwise there's no point. Well, there's a point if you can do it faster. But he was after the quality. The third one is the computer program has to model mathematics in a way that the author can input it, and the output is actually the proper mathematical formulas. And finally, you have to have digital fonts of a quality, and this is where Professor Hermann Zapf came into the picture as well. You have to have digital fonts in a quality that bypass the restrictions of the past. None of the three last things were available, so they all had to be developed. And here we have a couple of examples. I have some of them with me, actually. This here is the first book ever that has been produced by computer and results in high quality typesetting and high quality typesetting of STEM material mathematics. So this is Tech and Metafont, New Directions of Typesetting, done in 1979. The quality of the printout is not that great, because the printers that were used then for printing this book have been not on the high-end side as we have them these days. But you could reproduce the book today, you would get something with enormously clear output. It would look exactly the same. So anybody who wants afterwards take a look, if you are not running away with it, because that's one of the few copies surviving. Okay, so that's the first. As an example, let me see where it is. Here's the second one. It's a couple of years later. This is Concrete Mathematics, a book where Don was one of the co-authors. And it's lovely because it is using a very common mathematical font inspired by Euler's handwriting, drawn by Hermann Zapf. And so this is both, I think, a beautiful typography in this book, as well as it's one of the foundational math books actually for computer scientists. At least I hope it still is. So that's the second one, to show high print output from tech. And the third one goes a little bit outside of typical STEM material, goes into graphical design. This is a work by a professor in Mainz, Alban Grimm, in the art department, and he fell in love with Don's program called Metafont, which is producing fonts, and he used tech and Metafont to produce fonts which go from readable to graphic by changing parameters. So what you see on the left is a part of the acropolypse. What do you pronounce this? Apokalypse in German, yes. Okay. The text is below. The graphic on top is also the text. It's just distorted fonts. So you see here examples of how the font changes when you change parameters, and if you change further, it changes further. So this is how the graphics came. So this is an application of tech which is a little bit outside of the norm, you could say. And finally, something more recent. Again, it's not about anything about STEM. Here's one example. It's tech doing typesetting for traditional things. It's a Gutenberg society producing little booklets, and this was one of them. And as a small gimmick, there's a picture in the middle of this booklet by the author. And when I was typesetting that for the Gutenberg Society, I noticed that on the text before, there is this sentence, when words fail, a picture forms. And I noticed this was close to the end of this part of the text. So I asked tech to actually end it here and make the text flow like this. So it says exactly this, and when the picture forms, you turn, you get this. I mean, you could do this by hand, but tech was doing it for me. So that's a nice kind of sort of. But I had to look for it. I mean, I saw it by chance. Okay, so those are examples of what tech sort of is doing over the years, and let's dive a little bit deeper into this. The main point about typesetting text for tech was there's a new approach. Instead of typesetting a line, then typesetting the next line, putting characters by characters in, like most typesetters or Word and so are doing. If you go to computer typesetting, tech looks at the whole paragraph and tries to optimize the paragraph, thereby deciding that individual lines may all be looser or tighter being typeset so that they're looking balanced. So it is not first setting a line which is great, another line which is great, and then a line which is awful because there's no way to get it right. Instead, it is making the first line a little bit less good, the next line a little bit less good, but overall everything is better. So that's the idea there. And the second part, where Hermann Zapf added a huge idea, is the so-called Hermann Zapf AZ algorithm that changes the character width of individual characters. I mean, if you think about an M, you can make this M tiny bit wider or tiny bit closer. Your eyes do not notice. But by having this kind of variation in the character shapes horizontally, you can get the paragraph typesetting way above what is possible. And this is actually an old approach, because if we look carefully what Gutenberg did, he didn't use 26 letters, he used about 250. So he had 6 or 7 different A's, 5 or 8 different M's, and so on. And they were using different characters with slightly different widths to make this balanced thing. How they did this manually, without computer-aided guidance, they must have learned extremely how to sort of visualize what is possible. But yes, they did. And this is the reason why the Gutenberg Bible is so much better than a lot of the documents throughout the next 400 years. Okay. Here's an example to show how it works. The first block here is how you get it out of Word or out of Pages, which is what I used on the Mac to produce this. You see that lines 3 and 4 are fairly badly spaced. A lot of white space there. The next one is tech, ordinary tech, without Hermann Zapf's additional. You see the last line is much shorter already, so tech made it tighter. Yeah? Everything is a little bit sort of tighter. And if we put tech and HZ algorithm together, which by the way is a contribution from this university, because the original tech didn't have Hermann Zapf's algorithm included. It was a PhD student here at Masarykova University, Thunder Han, who implemented that for tech in collaboration with Hermann Zapf, who sort of helped with understanding the algorithm, as far as I understand. So that's the result that you get with both of them. And that's much better than the earlier two as well. So that's one thing. The other thing that you can do is you can vary the number of lines. This way you can tell the computer, please try to make this paragraph 1 line shorter. You normally cannot tell it to make it 1 line longer, because then it usually gets too loose. But making it 1 line shorter is often an alternative that gives you a very good look and may save you the problem that your conference paper is only allowed to have 8 pages. And you're 2 lines over. You find the paragraph to make it shorter and everything works. Nobody noticed that you are, now cheating is not the right word, that you have a very good program to do it for you. So this is part of what the text stuff is going. Formulas in mathematics. The big thing is, what Don invented is how to specify mathematics as something you can tell somebody else over the phone. So it's linear. You tell your formula over the phone and the other person understands it. The 2-dimensional representation is then produced later. You can change the output, like the example was the concrete mathematics, totally different mathematical representation in some sense of the formula, different fonts, different look and feel, upright, etc. Here's an example how the input looks for people who haven't seen tech or LaTeX beforehand. This has a lot of backslashes and a lot of braces, but it's fairly easy to read. Once you get the hang of it, this is the output. And you can sort of see how things match up. And you see that, for example, the summation sign, if it's on the display equation, the limits are above and below, and automatically in the text line, the limits are to the right, because in the text line there's not so much space. But that's done automatically by tech. The input looks the same from the author's perspective. So, book creation with tech. Again, things change here. We have this time a publisher who comes first in some sense. He says, here's my layout that I want you to have. And he's producing theoretically something for the author to use. Then the author writes the book in tech. He can view whatever he is producing and what the typesetter and the publisher gets in the end locally, because he can run the stuff locally. And he can typeset the whole book in the end and deliver a camera-ready copy, basically, for the editor, for the publisher. Now, there are two things. If the publisher then comes in and does copy editing, correction, there are two ways to do this. One is they do copy editing and correction, give the results to the author corrects it in tech, and that's the loop. So the author is involved. The other possibility is it gets down to somebody else, they do it there, and the author is no longer involved. The latter case is the one where you, again, end up potentially with misunderstandings. In the former case, it wouldn't be a problem. And then we still have the problem with errors in printing. We can't get rid of that. But in most cases, when the upper loop is used, there is only the errors in printing. Like the printer has not the right kind of quality control, like multi-colors and not properly aligned. These kind of things are outside of anybody's control in some sense. Okay. So what's the access on information then? For sighted readers, for people who appreciate the print, it's very good, because now, for the first time, we have high quality STEM represented. Well, not for the first time, because you could do it by experienced typesetters, but that was very, very expensive and therefore not done very often. So, for the first time, we also have output on electronic devices, so graphical terminals. I mean, initially we had only teletype terminals. I guess some older people remember that. So there you couldn't display a graphic, but at the time when Don was doing it, they came along, and nowadays every graphical terminal like this is graphic. So yes, you could present your documents on computer screens. And this is why we had new ways to make information available, and we would reach new consumers. But STEM was still very limited and usually not very accessible. So for so-called AT tools, assistive technology, it was completely broken. Of course, for important documents, it was manually remediated, that's the pronunciation, after the fact. But that's very expensive, and therefore it was only done under force or for very important documentation. So nobody wants to do that manually afterwards in using whatever tool. So a lot of the STEM documents are basically unusable for people who have the need for assistive technology. There's another thing. The original tech enabled high quality typesetting, but the author also had to be a designer, more or less, because it was very close to the typesetting side of the house. That was not going too well for most authors. Therefore, the real breakthrough with tech came only when Leslie Lamport sort of came up with the idea of separating semantic structure from layout. And that really made LaTeX become a hit in the mathematical community and later on in other places, because then it reached much more people. And these days, We have millions of people around the world to use it. Overleaf, which is an online service these days, has more than 25 million accounts by now, growing. But that's only a fraction of what is out there in the world, because we have huge communities in countries which wouldn't pay for overleaf. India, China, other areas of the world. You can say that the vast majority of mathematics, something like 95% in archives like the preprint archive, archive.org, is all in LaTeX. But it's also being used in other places. Chemists don't like it. They use Word to most extent, with exceptions. But something like critical editions in the linguist area, there are also quite more and more people seeing the benefits. So access to information, well, as I said, it's the same with tech. It's great for print and viewing, but it's not so cool if you can't view. So I like to give you a short demonstration of that, if I manage. Let's see. So this is there. You see all this text there? These are simple mathematical formulas, right? You agree? Okay, so, okay, this works. So let's see what happens. Nothing. Why is nothing happening? Try again. This comes from live shows. Okay, so I'm not going to try that now. I just show what would come out. Sorry for that. This is what you would get in red. The above formula is essentially read horizontally. So you see the N. The X is the summation sign, which lives in the slot where the uppercase X is, so it says X. And then it goes on to say the upper part of the equation, then the I, which is a little bit lower, therefore comes in the next, or comes next. So it's totally scrambling. Or the down here, the matrices, they are horizontally read. This is not anybody. And this is what we were doing for 30 years to people with disabilities in this, with vision. So that's, it just doesn't like me. Okay, so let's continue. This is what we got. So, as conclusions after the invention that Don brought into the space, we have, if we are using tech and LaTeX, more or less all the traditional errors of the processes being eliminated. It's only the ones on the printing house that remain. We have the typesetters more or less being replaced. The one that were doing hot metal or were doing a machinery. But on a higher level, there is typesetting going on still. So it's kind of a shift in that industry. But clearly the original craft is being codified in the computer. We have the situation that the quality that is being produced automatically, and the word really is automatic, is far higher than what we see in other products or processes. But we have the problem that visual impairments have not really been considered by anybody until that day. Which is not quite true. Already in 1786, people were thinking about what to do for people who have visual problems. So that was the first attempt was there to use embossing, so raising the paper so that people could trace the shape of the characters. Of course, that's very, very slow if you have to feel with your fingers the shape of individual characters. So the next step then was Louis Braille and Charles Barbier in France who thought about using abstraction, dots, which is, we all know them if you look into an elevator or something, a lift. You see the numbers, you can feel them. I can't feel anything. I don't know how about you. If I try to sort of get the right kind of feel, it's difficult, but it's possible. Obviously, people do it. The downside is, if you have a 6-dot matrix, there are not that many characters you can encode. So it's only 64 characters that you can represent, and therefore you are really, really limited. And a result of this limit is that if it comes to math, we have enormously many dialects. They are all different. They all encode the mathematics differently. And obviously you can imagine you cannot really communicate between different dialects unless you learn them all. So that's a real problem. Couple of small examples just to show what I was saying here. This is the one of those first attempts. The letters on the right are embossed. They are raised. The people could trace them. The text on the left is normal text for people to explain what's happening in this. This is another thing from the museum. People can trace, and this is done until today. I mean, if you look into graphics, there are these kind of embossed graphics so that blind people can get a feel for what it means, because you can't describe that perfectly well. And you can't see that, unfortunately, I fear, in this slide. You can see the little dots. It's possible. Okay. So this is trying to. This is the math formulas on the left, and the chemical formula on the right. I think the chemical formula starts further down, so this is probably still math. I'm not reading Braille, so I might be mistaken, but this is an example of from 1920. We are still a little bit too big to show the bottom. Let me go like this. Okay, so that's another one from 1921. And here's the process, the typesetting process. People were using a typewriter to input the 6 dots. So this young boy has his finger on the machine to produce one character at a time. So he is doing the same work as a scribe before Gutenberg. Now, the Gutenberg extension would be this kind of thing. You put the letter on a rotating cylinder, and then you emboss one page at a time. And another example is this one. This was very much hyped because embossing machines were very expensive at the time. So a young fellow tried to make a cheap one using Lego Mindstorms. It never became a product, but it was very much sort of discussed. There are, of course, professional machines to make embossing but it's very expensive. We have using computers. They can simplify the Braille input, but you still have the machinery to produce the embossed output. And also computers can use assistive technology tools, which is a different way of getting information to people with accessibility needs. So the situation until then, or until now in some sense, Braille is complicated and costly. It's restricted regionally, and the expressiveness is quite limited. Which means that you are easily losing information. So this is what I already said. Yeah. Okay. So we knew about all these problems for a long time in the LaTeX project, but as a volunteer group, it was looking like making LaTeX and tech better in this respect is impossible to run as a project because it's too costly, too problematically to make it work. But we started to see more and more the need and the pressure coming along, also because people in various countries were putting out regulations, which is good, to actually force everybody to help making things accessible. And by some lucky chance, we were able to obtain some funds to start a project, which was in 2020. And the idea was we wanted to make LaTeX output automatically accessible, meaning that assistive technology tools can read out to the blind user. The blind user can communicate with the machinery to navigate through mathematics to understand what is in the document. That was the goal. And since last year, you could say, we have managed to reach that goal. The approach was LaTeX, by the ideas of Leslie Lamport, had semantic information as part of the input. So it's an unfortunate idea that the semantics are actually in the input. So all you need to do is to put them in the output, right? It's a very easy thing. The problem was that, here's an example. You can first of all ignore that you should put in semantic information, and unfortunately, there are a lot of documents which, instead of saying \footnote, here's a footnote, they say no, not even backslash, they say $1. That means raise a 1. So they put a mathematical formula there because they want to have a footnote marker. Of course, if you try to translate that, a translation would say, some text, mathematical formula, a superscript 1. That's, well, maybe one can guess what was meant, but it's certainly not right. So forget about that. If the text was done correctly with LaTeX, then you have the semantic information. But this has lost his battery. No? Well, let's go like this. This is the problem. The problem with LaTeX is it was done for computers which have little memory. So even though there is semantic information, LaTeX tried to get rid of it as fast as possible. Because for printing, you don't need it very long. So the moment it was no longer necessary, it was thrown out of the processing to keep space for other important things to get print properly done. And that was really a big problem for us when we want to preserve this, because we had to redesign LaTeX internals from ground up to keep it, make sure that the information is kept in the right way. And the problem there is we have millions of users, and we don't want to lose them by breaking the system. It also doesn't work to make a new system, because people will not want to change. If their system works and they are not in the position to have a need or a strong requirement to produce something accessible, they say, why should I change my system? You would lose a lot of people. I've seen that when we went from Leslie Lamport's LaTeX 209 to LaTeX 2 Epsilon in 1994, and I nearly lost the American population of LaTeX because there were some strong voices saying, why the heck should we have so much disk space? Don't use this new LaTeX. They have all these fonts with these unnecessary accented characters in it. Nobody need them. Nobody means nobody speaking English and not even have foreign accents in the bibliography. But yeah, so there's always the problem that change is scary and change appears to be unnecessary. So our solution was clearly to say we have to do it within the system. It has to come by itself. There's a strong motivation right now because the US and European universities and so are being forced to produce accessible documentation. And so there are quite a lot of people who are scared because they have everything in Beamer or so, and suddenly, how do you get access your teaching material? So they are really happy that we are actually being able to do that now. But yes, that's a real problem, to make this work without breaking all people's existing documentation or the workflows they have. And then there's the third part, which is really hard, namely, we want to get the mathematics right. And TeX mathematics is a very well-documented algorithm, but it's not accessible from the TeX language. It's basically a black box. You can look up how it works, you can do this, but it's not changeable. And what you want to do is to actually inject some code to turn the mathematics into MathML. And so there, the solution is either to do it from the outside, which is painful because the process then would have different components. You produce something in TeX, you go to a different tool and so on and go back. Or you use the newest or one of the newer TeX engine, which is called LuaTeX, which has a built-in programming language named Lua as part of the machinery, and there you can actually access the internals. So I think we are recommending to go away from the older engines and actually use LuaTeX, because in the older engines, not everything we are doing is possible. As of March this year, the situation is we can do automatically accessible PDFs in the newest standard, PDF UA2. And yesterday I said something like the biggest surprise for me was we were producing all this stuff and then none of the industry tools could use it. That has changed. So that's good. A user quote, which I'm pretty proud of from the early days, when things were working, from the Secretary of the Science and Engineering Division for the National Federation of the Blind. He said, it's the first time I ever were able to read a PDF myself. Good. It's not perfect yet, but it's good to hear those things. Yeah, as I said, industry adoption, horrible. Initially, nothing worked. We had the stuff, and then what? Then one smaller PDF reader started to support our stuff. Adobe is catching up. They see that others can do it, so something is happening there. The big change for me is March this year, or end of February, really. Firefox is supporting PDF properly for the first time. So the first browser, you can give it a structured PDF and it comes out correctly. And we are seeing that Chrome is following, so we see that the browser world is adapting as well. And also in March, we got a press release from the PDF Association saying, oh, finally we have mathematics. So that's a good sign. Some project statistics. You know, the LaTeX universe is huge, 5,000–6,000 packages. But of course, not every package is very important. We have looked at all the packages that are on archive.org. We have looked at all the packages that we recommend in the LaTeX Companion, which is about 500. And we want to have these packages being all accessible. And from those, we have at the moment something like 1,000 being either fully accessible or accessible with some caveats. Not everything is perfect, say. So that's a good start. We have about 360 incompatible. The no support you can ignore. This is old stuff we found. We just say, please use something else. Here's the list of alternatives. And we have about 320 that we just don't know yet. But basically, we are quite a long way. On the other hand, there's still something to do. Okay, so summary. And I'm overdrawing quite a lot, so I'm going there and be fast. First of all, the document production changed a lot over the centuries in the sense we started with handwritten communication, oral, nothing else. Then Gutenberg produced reproducible stuff. Not big, but first step there. Then we have further automation with machinery. Then, in the last 50 years, we came to high-quality computerized typesetting. And finally, we have something like accessible scientific documents. The participant changed. We started with scribes. Typesetters came in. We have the publishers jumping in, and we have the typesetters going out again. This is a dying species in some sense. It's lovely to do it. I mean, you saw the first picture, that was me trying to use handprint metal typesetting on. But it is no longer used very much. So that's a big change here. And there has been a lot of change in terms of access to information. It started with very limited information exchange. We got wider and wider and wider throughout the years. And we are finally, this is the big change, we are finally embracing a new group of people, those that need something else than print or vision on the screen. So, the big question to everybody is, what comes next? I mean, we have solved this part, haven't we? Okay, if you want to have my guess on this, it's the first time the role of the author is changing. I mean, before, okay, it changed from writing by hand to writing with the computer, but otherwise it was always the same role. Now, for the first time, we see that the role is being modified. On one hand, as an author, we have to learn to consider accessibility. I think it's very important. That's a good thing to have. We have to consider accessibility in the first place, not as an afterthought. But that's a small thing. What is coming right now in big steps is that artificial intelligence is intruding in this space. And we have to learn what that means. We have to understand it. And in terms of universities and other places, you have to research, in my opinion, that, and also be a guiding force, how to use it. And you will find problems with using it in the wrong way, starting from cheating to anything else. So that's an important change, but it may also drive the author out. Okay, but that's a story for somebody else and some later time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Frank, for a nice talk, and we have some time for questions, if there are any. Okay, I will start with one, and perhaps some other will come. So I have seen recently in the TV, in like a Harry Potter movie, these newspapers with animated pictures, when these are going to be typeset in LaTeX.
You said when? They are typeset in LaTeX already for a long time. I mean, you can have... Well, it was easier with PostScript output from LaTeX, but theoretically you can have sort of movies and stuff like that as part of the process.
Well, I always do like slide after slide to animate my pictures, so...
It's a good trick, yes. And this is the way, yeah, I'm not so keen on this kind of mixture. It usually doesn't work very well, so I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in that in any way. But yeah, there are possibilities and there are people doing it.
Okay. Any other questions?
So what's the problem with LaTeX for chemists? You said that chemists are not as fond of LaTeX as some other users.
Well, it's not my problem. I think historically there are a lot of chemist tools based on the Windows world outputting certain things that work very nicely by integrating into Word. So that's a workflow people have been very much used to. But that's only sort of my vague understanding of it. I mean, one person in the LaTeX project team is a chemist, and he's doing everything in LaTeX, and he has people doing, he knows people doing everything in LaTeX, but he also says, I'm in the minority. It's the way it is in some cases. Sometimes it's just because I said yesterday something like, sometimes a bad standard is better than nothing, and in some sense the standard in the chemistry and the exchange between people has been through Word and these specialized tools producing graphics and so on, fitting into the Word process.
Is it because the mathematics is different, or is it very specific? I'm not a chemist.
I don't think they use very much mathematics. Most of the mathematics they use is coming out of those tools. They get the results already as a graphic. So they are not, I mean, there are chemists that do a lot of equations of changes in status of material and stuff like that. And they tend to be the ones who actually sort of leaning more towards LaTeX, I guess, or similar tools. But the others have more like, here's the output of my graphic, which also has some chemical formula coming out of that tool. And then it's done.
Yeah, well, hopefully it's accessible.
Yeah, this is the interesting point. They might have to come to that, or those tools actually go this way. I mean, if there's a market, I think one way or the other, the market will be picking things up. It might be that the tools to survive when the requirements are come do exactly that, or it might be that people then jump to something else, which might be LaTeX. I don't know. We will see. Right now, at least in the mathematics world, where heavily mathematics is being used, we are kind of top-notch in terms of that we produce it, as well as in the quality it will be produced. The quality was always very good, but we were also the first to be able to do it. But people are coming. The Word mathematical editor is now also outputting MathML. So yes, people have seen that and also seen it as see it as a market.
Thank you.
If I understand well, then LaTeX is designed to produce books, papers with the predefined design via LaTeX. Are there also initiatives where the target is not a book, a paper, but a website with variable widths and things like that?
Yes and no. I mean, you can think of something like LaTeX in 3 pillars. First of all, there's the input language, which is abstractly just input language. There's nothing said about pagination, and so this is just semantics. Then you have the typical result coming out of translating the input into the page design. And then you come to, maybe I want something else. In the past, the solution was to say there have been tools that take the input language and do the translation directly. So they never produced the PDF, they took the input language and did the interpretation in one way or the other. So there are these tools that make HTML. Now what we are doing is we are putting the semantic information into the PDF, and then you actually have transformation possibilities out of the PDF that allow you exactly the same. Why do I think that this is better than the other solution? The reason is, in the past, the other solutions had to interpret the LaTeX language sort of after the fact. So for the tools, packages, and everything that were known, they do a very good job. But when there's a new package coming along or a package changes, the post-processing need to change as well. And so you're always running behind that. If we are actually making accessibility a first-class citizen in the sense that everything LaTeX is producing is taking from input to the PDF output the semantics with it, the tools for producing something like HTML, which is free flow, which is the main thing, can use that information directly. So they don't have to guess because it's still coming from the input. So long-term or mid-term, I think we will see that these tools are actually starting to embrace that and stop trying to heuristically or manually figure out how to deal with the special input syntax. And it's actually possible. The moment you have a PDF like I'm talking about, there is a transformation possibility to HTML which works 100% correctly. It's still something that needs improvement, so there is a standardization going on where people say how to do these kind of things better, but that's I think, the right kind of approach, because then we keep the information at the right level together.
Okay, we anyway run out of the time, so thank you, Frank,
Yeah,
for the
I
talk.
did slowly, I noticed.
And let's thank the speaker again. Thank you.
Thank you.